Hi, I'm Brett Johnson, former United States Most Wanted Cybercriminal, now good guy, and host of The Brett Johnson Show. Today's episode number 53, Fake Criminals, from Frank Abagnale to modern-day liars, when we come back. All right, so we are back to The Brett Johnson Show. Today's episode number 53, Fake Criminals, from Frank Abagnale to modern-day liars. Now, hey, before we start, and today's episode is, I don't think I'm going to be telling that many jokes today. I don't think there's going to be a whole hell of a lot of voices. Maybe there will be. I don't know. But just my mood right now is not one of screwing around and playing around a lot. It's more serious today. And I want to start out. So the viewers of my show, when I was on YouTube, and then I got kicked off. Now I'm back on YouTube. I'm on Spotify. I'm building up that base again. People who've been with me from the beginning know that I used to start my show off with a much longer intro. So I'm just going to repeat that intro right now. And there's a reason for that. And I think that reason will become apparent as today's show goes on. So my name is Brett Johnson. I'm the host of The Brett Johnson Show. The United States Secret Service called me the original internet godfather. Now, how do you get a title like that? In my case, 39 felonies, a place on the United States Most Wanted list. I escaped from prison, and if that weren't enough, I also built and ran the first organized cybercrime community. It was called Shadow Crew. It was a precursor to today's darknet and darknet markets. It laid the foundation for the way modern cybercrime channels operate today. Those 39 felonies had to do with refining modern financial cybercrime as we now know it. Account takeovers, credit card theft, phishing schemes, tax return identity theft, you name it. I was on the ground floor of developing, refining, implementing it, just outright doing it. And yes, that does get one sent to prison, deservedly so. And usually the story ends at that point. But I was very fortunate. I've been very fortunate throughout most of my life, even when I was a criminal. I was fortunate that through my sister, through my wife, Michelle, finally through the FBI, and then through the cybersecurity community at large, not just them, but people most everywhere, they were very open. They gave me this opportunity to turn my life around, and I took it. Today, I lead a very blessed life that I'm going to tell you, and I say it frequently. Most anytime I'm on stage, I say it. I lead a blessed life that I really don't think I deserve, but I am damn grateful to have. And I take it very seriously, this job of protecting people from the type of person that I used to be. I don't want to be remembered as the guy who stole everything. I want to be remembered as the guy who was able to turn this shit around. All right? Now, the reason I'm saying that intro and going into a little bit more, we'll get into that, and hopefully it'll make sense as today's show goes on. I am frequently referred to as the new Catch Me If You Can guy. The old Catch Me If You Can guy. He's 74. His name is Frank Abagnale. People may not know the name, but they know the movie, Catch Me If You Can. Leonardo DeCaprio. Steven Spielberg directed it. Tom Hanks is in it as well. It's an outstanding film. It is truly an outstanding film, and it has had a profound effect on me and my life. I was a lifetime criminal. Here's the thing. I pled guilty to 39 felonies. I was actually charged, it was in the 70s, maybe more than that. I think I tend to remember like 76 felonies. And the 39, that's not an arbitrary number. It may be 37, it may be 42, but 39 is a safe bet for what I pled to. I've not read my indictment for a while, but I think it's 39. The reason I'm doing what I'm doing today, consulting, speaking across the planet, working with the largest companies, doing victim work, talking at universities, speaking at Quantico when the world is turned on. I've got to get back in there. The reason I do all that, I can directly attribute to Frank Abagnale, the Catch Me If You Can guy, because of his story. He was a check fraudster. He did all this weird bullshit, this outlandish crap, and he turned his life around. And that's when I got arrested, February 8th of 2005. I started working toward that. I knew the story because the movie was still fresh and everything. I knew the story, and I was like, maybe I can do that. Maybe I can do that. And that was always in my mind through those 7 years in prison. That was always in my mind that I can do this because he was able to. I can do this. I know that I can turn this shit around. So I just wanted to share that. Now, the reason I'm talking about this today, today's episode, Fake Criminals, from Frank Abagnale to Modern Day Liars. There's been a lot of press lately. Actually, there's been chatter since Frank Abagnale began his legal career that he was lying about his escapades. Recently, not even recently, a couple of years ago, a book came out by Alan Logan. The name of the book, you can find it on Amazon. The name of the book is The Greatest Hoax on Earth, Catching Truth While You Can. It's on Kindle. You can get it hardback. You can get it softback. Or hell, you don't even have to read it. You can just read the news stories. There's a podcast called Pretend. I think it's like a 10-episode podcast that goes into the lies that Mr. Abagnale has told over time. The reason I'm doing this story today, there's a few reasons. The New York Post put out an article talking about Mr. Abagnale. Again, not only that, but it appears, I just found out last night, that it appears that I am going to be at the same conference that Frank Abagnale is, if he doesn't drop out. Now, I say that because up until this year, I was an ambassador for AARP. We're going through a recession, so a lot of my contracts have dropped, and AARP is like, we'll see you next year, or we'll just do piecemeal by you. I'm like, that's fine, guys. AARP is a great group. Frank Abagnale at one point worked for AARP, and he was doing a podcast for AARP, and I was invited to be on that podcast. He and another gentleman hosted that show. I went to appear, and I was supposed to meet Frank Abagnale that day, and Mr. Abagnale mysteriously got sick, and he decided not to show up. And I didn't think much about it. I really didn't. I was like, okay, that's fine. Looking back now, I think that he may have been a little scared to talk to me about fraud and crime. And I'm going to go into some of the lies that Mr. Abagnale has told. That's not, while we are talking about Frank Abagnale today, I'm going to move over into some of my life. I'm in the cybersecurity industry. So I'm going to talk about some of the questionable people that are in the cybersecurity industry and their lack of verifiable history, even though they're making some claims that are out there. I'm going to talk about some liars in general. I don't know why I just put my glasses on. I guess I'm a little nervous. This is not my normal type of show. Usually by this point, I'm bouncing off the walls, doing voices, doing everything else like that. But this is a little bit more serious for me today. Let me take these back off because I want to talk to you guys for a minute. I am 53 years old. I began my life of crime when I was 10, shoplifting. Okay, anyone who has listened to my story knows this. Began when I was 10 years old, shoplifting. In my presentations, I say that when I'm talking about that and my mom finds out, I say, I stood up and I lied because I've always been this liar. And I said, hey, we found the stuff. And my mom's like, you didn't find that. And my sister stands up and my sister's like, we stole it. And my mom says, oh, show me how you did that. And she joins us. That's true. I reference that part where I say that I've always been a liar. That was the case for decades. For decades, I was a liar. I lied to family. I lied to friends. I lied to victims. I lied to myself. I lied to everyone, law enforcement, everything else. And I became very, very good at lying, at manipulating people, at being able to read people, at laying the groundwork of those lies and manipulations that may take a while for them to be fully realized. It's very good about that. Nothing to be proud of. All right. But you take a kid at 10 years old. I was arrested when I was 35, spent 7 years in prison, finally turned my life around when I was really, really consciously made the decision to turn my life around. When I was 44, 45, did not really start to get traction on this legal career until I was, this would have been 2016, 2017. All right. A long process. And through most of that time, I was a liar. Okay. When I made the decision to turn things around, and I wanted people to understand that, yes, it took me to make that decision, but I could not do that by myself. You can't. You have to have people that are willing to help you, that will take the chance on you. All right. And I had that, I had the impetus, my sister, who really is the only family member I've got. I mean, my dad's living with me now, and I've got a good relationship with my father, but my sister has been that rock throughout my life. I've got my wife now, and I've got family, but my sister has been that rock. So my sister helped give me that impetus. Then when I got out of prison, I met my wife, Michelle. She showed me what love can be and what a healthy relationship is, and provided that. And then finally, the FBI, they gave me that validation. And all of that, that's just that's a huge part of it. That's just like the cornerstone. What happens from there is I had Carice Hendrick from the Card Not Present group. She was an editor at large from Card Not Present, and she's no longer a friend of mine. I have no idea why she kind of dropped off the planet with me, but that happens sometimes. People move on, they outgrow each other, things like that. She gave me my my first real speaking gig. Okay, and then from there it built really quickly, really quickly to today. I speak across the planet. I'm very blessed. I would not have been able to turn my life around without that happening, without those people there. And even today, that continues. I've got friends in law enforcement. I've got friends in the cybersecurity industry, and I've got friends all over. I say friends. I've got people that I know that care about me, that watch after me, and want to see me do well. They're my peers. I guess peers is a better word for that. I don't have many friends. Just because someone like me, with the people who've listened to my show, the childhood that I had, the life that I had, it doesn't afford one. I went without friends for decades, and I don't know if I'll ever be capable of having friends. Okay. Sometimes that happens. But there are positive things to that as well, and we're going to get into that as the show goes. So the point is that I would not have been able to turn my life around without all of this happening. Now, I said before I was a liar for years, and that's true. What happened with me is when I began speaking, okay, while Carice Hendrick gave me my first paid speaking gig, that was not my first it was not my first speech, or even my first paid speech. There were a couple of people that came in before the CNP conference of that year, and they paid me to speak a couple of bankers, Bank of the West, a few places like that. My first speech was for ideology, and it was a bit of a nightmare. I did okay, all right, but it was my first time on stage. I come from a stage background, so I'm good on stage. I know how to handle myself. I'm not going to go off the rails or start stuttering or just lay down and have a seizure or anything else like that. But that first presentation was very rough around the edges, and in that presentation, I was not as open as people see me today. So I gave that presentation, and then I gave a couple of banking presentations after that. During about the third presentation before the CNP conference, which Carice Hendrick had gotten me in on, before that conference, I realized that, hey, Brett, you may be doing this for the rest of your life, at least for the rest of your working life. If you're going to do this, be truthful. Just get it out. And what I was holding back on, I was very embarrassed that I had gotten out of prison in 2011 and that I had recidivated, that I had committed credit card theft after I got out of prison. I talk about that in my presentations. All right. I was very embarrassed by that. I didn't want people to know that. I didn't want people to judge me on that. And about the third presentation now, I hadn't talked about that. And I said to myself, I was like, hey, just tell the truth. Hell, they can look that shit up on the internet. Just tell the truth. Not only that, but I also said to myself, if you're going to do this stuff for what looks like several years, if you're going to do this, if it becomes successful, it's important for you to try to find out something new about yourself every single time that you speak. So when I'm on a stage or on a podcast, like today's show, for example, it's a bit of therapy for me. I really try to find out something new about myself every single time that I speak to people, even though, and people who have heard me talk before on podcast, on stage, on my own show, everything else, people who have heard me talk before know that, hey, a lot of the times he tells the same damn stories. And I do, because a lot of shows, a lot of conferences, they want to know that bio. All right. So I will reference the same stories over and over. But even though I'm referencing those same stories, I try to find out something new about myself. Like today, for example, I'm talking about how I spent years lying to people. Everybody. Okay. Everyone. Now the question I've been thinking the past few days, why? What causes someone to lie? Well, don't want to be judged, looking for something in return, trying to manipulate someone. There's a whole host of reasons for why people lie. You're looking to not be punished. You're looking for a reward at some point. You're looking to gain something up. You're trying to convince someone of something that's not true. The thing of when you start to lie is that once you tell a lie, you have to continue to tell supporting lies to make sure that one main lie, that origin lie, that original sin, you have to make sure that you're telling supporting lies that help build around that, so that one initial lie is solidified. And with that, I think that might tell a bit about Frank Abagnale. So I'm going to read right now from the New York Post story. And this probably will not be a very long show. It might be. I don't know. We'll see. But the New York Post, March 21st. Oh, that's just today's date. New York Post about a week and a half ago. Oh, March 13th. March 13th, 2023. The name of the article, Catch Me If You Can, con man Frank Abagnale Jr. lied about his lifetime of lies, sources claim. So, this is written by Abby Ellin, E-L-L-I-N. And it starts out, I'm going to read some of this. I'm not going to read the whole article, but I'm going to read some of this because it's a very good article. And I'm going to reference parts of it, and we'll talk about it as we go through that. I'm going to give you my thoughts on that, and we're going to continue from that point. Frank W. Abagnale Jr. was annoyed. The Times of London had reviewed my 2019 book about serial liars called Duped, and a photo of Leonardo DeCaprio in full pilot regalia accompanied the piece. It was the famous still from Catch Me If You Can, Steven Spielberg's 2002 film, inspired by Abagnale's best-selling memoir from 1980. Via email, the reformed con artist and author, who now advises businesses, banks, department stores, and the FBI on fraud prevention and cybercrime, wanted me to know that it bothered him that, quote, every day someone writes an article about a bank robbery, forgery, con artist, or even cybercrime, and they refer to me. The crime I committed was writing bad checks. I was 16 years old at the time. I served 5 years total in prisons in Europe and the U.S. federal prison system. In 1974, after serving 4 years in federal prison, the government took me out of prison to work for the FBI. I have done so now for more than 43 years. End quote. Frank added that he had repaid all of his debts. His distress surprised me. Abagnale never seemed embarrassed by his past, not when he appeared on To Tell the Truth, nor The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, nor in high-paying speaking gigs around the country. As a side note, my understanding is that Mr. Abagnale demands upwards of $35,000 per speech at times, and sometimes does 2 to 3 speeches a day. Hey, I'm not knocking the dude, all right? If I could pull in $35K a speech, and I do pretty damn well, if I could pull in $35,000 a speech, you bet your ass I would. All right. His Grifter Made Good story was a huge selling point, according to both Abagnale himself and his autobiography. In the mid-60s and early 70s, when he was between 16 years old and 21, he had impersonated a Pan Am pilot, flying some 3 million miles to 82 countries for free. He claimed to have posed as a doctor in Marietta, Georgia. And I know it's doctor. I just say doctor because I sound more important like that. He claimed to have posed as a doctor in Marietta, Georgia, a sociology professor at Utah's Brigham Young University, outstanding university, by the way, and a lawyer in the Attorney General's office in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. During that period, he allegedly cashed 17,000 bogus checks totaling $2.5 million with the FBI in hot pursuit. Those who have seen the film know what the hell I'm talking about. Now, the writer, Abby Ellen, she says, that's the legend anyway, as told in print, film, theater, and speeches worldwide. It's a story that has brought Abagnale fame, fortune, and most of all, legitimacy. So why did he object to being in a book about deception, this duped book by her? Here's the thing. Now, Abagnale, yeah, he appears in stories all the damn time. I tend to be interviewed because, again, I'm frequently referred to as the new Catch Me If You Can guy. I interview, hell, I don't know. I talked to I had 2 interviews last week. One of them was with Rolling Stone. So I do 2 to 3, 4 interviews a week. All right. And I'm frequently in print as well. Now, am I embarrassed by my past? That's an interesting question. I can't say that I am embarrassed by it. I am not proud of it. All right. But I also understand in no uncertain terms that my past has opened up many doors currently for me. All right. My past is what causes someone like the Rolling Stone to pick up the phone and call me. All right. It opens the door. However, when I'm giving an interview, if they're asking about my bio, I'll share that with them. But typically when I give interviews, it's about current crimes, frauds, things that are happening, or trends that might be happening. I'm very well versed in things that are going on now. So I absolutely use my past, that Shadow Crew bit, US Most Wanted, Godfather, original internet Godfather. I use all of that to open a door. Then once the door is open, I like to talk about things that are going on now. I do not, anyone who has ever seen me talk in a podcast, on stage, on my own show, a lot of the times it may seem, out of the gate in a presentation, it seems like, oh, this motherfucker is going to be bragging about committing crime. That's for the first 20, 30 seconds. And then it takes this weird, hard turn to where he ain't bragging about shit all of a sudden. All right. I don't find any pride. There's no pride to be found in victimizing people, in stealing money. That's not something to be proud of. It's not something to be proud of being a liar, that you're lying to people in order to manipulate them so that you can steal shit from them. It's not anything to be proud of. All right. So I don't take pride in that. I can understand. I can absolutely understand that, no, I really can't. He says there's a story about him every day. And I kind of believe that. There's a lot of stories about Frank Abagnale. I don't there's a lot of stories right now about Frank Abagnale being a liar and about the stuff that he has claimed that happened that never happened. Before that, there's been a lot of positive press over the years about Mr. Abagnale. So I don't really understand a lot of what he's claiming there. So she continues, the writer continues, I asked Abagnale, who founded Abagnale and Associates, a firm that advises companies on fraud prevention, founded in 1976. This question, why did he object to being in a book about deception? But he never responded. Now, the reason I think that Mr. Abagnale did not respond to that or had problems of being in a book about deception is because, as the news is starting to report, it's gaining more traction since Alan Logan's book, I think that the deception continues to this day. And because of that, once you're caught in that lie, that original sin lie, that foundational lie, and then you have to tell all these supporting lies to kind of back it up, you're always scared that something is going to cause that house of cards to fall. I think that's why Frank Abagnale did not want to meet me on a podcast. Maybe I'm being a bit narcissistic when I say that. Maybe I am. But I think that's why he didn't want to meet me. I think that's why Frank Abagnale typically does not take any questions in any of his presentations. I think that he can't, first of all, that he can't answer the questions. Second of all, that he might get a question that might cause that house of cards to start to shudder and maybe potentially fall at the end of the day. That's what I think. So she continues, and I put it out of my head until June 2020, when another email popped up in my box, this time from a man named Jim Keith. In 1981, Jim Keith was a manager of security at a JCPenney store in St. Louis, Missouri. He heard Abagnale speak at an area high school about turning his life around. Keith and a local detective were in the audience. Much of the speech was filled with, quote, technical information regarding bad checks, end quote. And it was, to Keith, incorrect. Keith says, we walked away with a sick feeling that we and those students were sold a bill of worthless goods. This pissed Keith off. Infuriated, he began researching Abagnale. Keith was, his daughter, Heather Crosby, says he was like a dog with a bone. He was determined to show this guy was a fraud. Accusations that Abagnale had fabricated his life story had been swirling around for years, beginning with the San Francisco Chronicle in 1978 and the Daily Oklahoman soon after. Now, here's the thing. So Abagnale was coming up. He was trying to do speeches, all right? And when he would do a speech, like in San Francisco, you would have reporters there. Even when you're beginning, you tend to have some press there. The local press will show up and they'll say, okay, what's this guy talking about? He claims to be a criminal. Let's see what he used to do, see what he's got. So, kind of local interest stories. So Abagnale would give a presentation like in San Francisco. There'd be a local reporter there, and Abagnale will start to claim this bullshit. And the local reporter would sit there going, I wonder if that shit really happened. So he would go and research it. And he would find out that Frank Abagnale was full of shit. And he would report about it in the local paper. There was no internet back then. So what would Frank Abagnale do? Frank Abagnale would load up the wagon and he wouldn't leave town and go to someplace else. He did that in San Francisco. He did it in Oklahoma. There was no internet, so those stories did not follow him. And as he continued to tell the story, it continued to build traction. The thing is, there's a great HBO show. I forgot the name of the show. Forgot who the host was on it. But it's a comedy about history. And this guy it's kind of a docu-comedy. This guy goes into a classroom and he's talking about history. And he's talking about when the legend becomes a fact, you print the legend. And he gives the stories of Paul Revere and Israel Bishop. And Israel Bishop rode a couple 100 miles to warn that the British was coming. Meanwhile, Paul Revere rode like 17 miles. And who becomes famous? Well, Paul Revere, because he had the friggin' song and the poem. All right, so he becomes famous. Israel, nobody knows about Israel anymore. Frank is kind of that way. Frank continues to tell these stories, and it continues to build traction because he keeps moving around and avoiding that press report. Anybody that kind of reports on it and calls him out, he just leaves that area. What happens, though, is you over time, you do so many presentations, and over time, press kind of just takes some shit for granted. They stop verifying. Remember in my presentations, I talk how it's important. I believe that we should trust, but you need to verify shit too. So at some point, that verification starts to fail, and his stories start to build traction until finally Catch Me If You Can. The book comes out. Steven Spielberg picks it up. Leonardo DeCaprio stars in it with Tom Hanks, and the legend becomes a fact. So you print the legend. You print how he passes the bar exam, how he pretends to be a doctor, how he flies planes, stuff like that. And that becomes the fact all of a sudden. Untrue, completely untrue, because if you watch my show, there's a difference between facts and truth. Sometimes they're not related at all. So, and it says, and Ellen says that right, or Ellen says it right here. But with no household internet, these stories never reached critical mass. Abagnale's fantastical feats remained unchallenged. Keith eventually teamed up with a professor named William Toney, a former Border Patrol officer and professor of criminal justice at Stephen Austin University in Nacogdoches, Texas. I've been to Nacogdoches. I've spoken to that university. Nacogdoches, if you've never been, I absolutely love that town. I could move there in a heartbeat. All right, but this professor there comes there, and he too had witnessed an Abagnale talk, and he didn't buy it. So he enlisted his students to help investigate. Keith sent Abby Ellen an 87-page file of old newspaper clippings, court documents, letters from airlines, university officials, government sources, and others, along with correspondence from this Professor Toney, who died in 2010. Some of what Abagnale said was true. He did forge checks. He did masquerade as pilots and sit in a few jump seats. He escaped a jailhouse, and when he escaped a jailhouse when he went to prison in Europe. All right, but here's what you got to pay attention to. But the rest of his brags were, quote, inaccurate, misleading, exaggerated, or totally false, end quote. As Abagnale's and this is Abagnale's former speaking agent. I've been blessed with my speaking agent, Joshua Colin from Authentic Talent. He's a fantastic guy. Frank's former speaking agent says of Frank, he was a two-bit criminal. I'm embarrassed that I ever associated with the man. Now, bear that in mind for a second. Frank Abagnale's former speaking agent, the guy who booked speeches, who made money off of Abagnale, who helped Abagnale gain traction and get his name out there, says of Abagnale that he was a two-bit criminal, and he's embarrassed that he ever associated with him. Abagnale never pretended to be a professor at Brigham Young or a physician in Georgia. Got that? It never happened. He never pretended to be a professor at Brigham. He was never acting as a doctor in Georgia. He never posed as a lawyer in the Baton Rouge Attorney General's office, which means he never passed the bar exam. He was never a consultant to the U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee. All right, it never happened. It never happened. I'm going to go on down here, skip over some of this stuff, because here's where some other stuff gets kind of important. Now, this Keith wrote, one of the head guys, the chief counsel of Pan Am at the time. And this guy wrote him back saying, I am sorry not to have the time or the inclination to rebut the same dribble this individual, Abagnale, has been peddling for years about all those stolen checks. It's impossible for Abagnale to have completed his criminal enterprises between the ages of 16 and 21. And that's what Frank Abagnale says he did. He spent much of his time in prison between the ages of 16 and 21. In fact, between 16 and 21, he was only a free man for 14 months. During those 14 months, he claims that during the ages of 16 and 21, that he cashed 17,000 fraudulent checks for a total of $2.5 million. So he's saying that he cashed 17,000 checks in 14 months. Let's do the math. 17,000 divided by 14 months means that he had to have cashed 40, count them, 40. You know, the number 40. One comes after 39, but becomes before 41. He cashed 40 checks a day to total that $2.5 million. Now, this is back before we had mobile deposit. It's back before you had your cell phone that could take a snapshot of that check and it would deposit it like that, or you could throw the thing in the ATM and deposit it. So he had to physically cash those checks, walk in, go through a drive-through, if they even had drive-throughs back then, go through a drive-through and deposit those checks, 40 of them a day. Let me tell you guys, in case you don't know, that is physically impossible. You can't do it. So he was lying about all of that, all right? Okay. November 1970, Frank was 21 years old. He was picked up by Cobb County, Georgia, after cashing 10 fake checks worth a total of $1,400. He was sent to a federal penitentiary in Petersburg, Virginia, in April of 1971 and sentenced to 12 years. Abagnale has claimed that the government sprung him from Petersburg to work with the FBI, but there is no evidence to support this claim. The FBI would not comment. Now, here's the thing. The FBI will not comment. That's part of policy. They're not going to comment on that. So while an FBI agent was looking for Mr. Abagnale, there is no proof that he was ever picked up or there was ever a task force created to find the guy. All right? So bear that shit in mind. Story goes on, but we're not going to continue reading the story because, hey, this is not story time hour where I read from books and articles on every show. I just wanted to read part of this article, New York Post, about Frank Abagnale. Here's my thoughts. I think that Frank Abagnale, certainly a criminal, all right? He's got a history of crime. He spent a lot of time in prison as well, was arrested several times. He has claimed over the years that, hey, I only ripped off corporations and banks and people who could afford it. Let me tell you guys something. Complete lie, all right? From my personal history and from the history of any real criminal that's out there, you don't just hit governments, banks, corporations. You also victimize people, all right? My criminal history, and I've talked about that, you know, I hit people as well as governments. Mom and pops, single mothers. I victimized people. There was no limit on that. Frank Abagnale is no different. The reason that he says that is he's trying to build goodwill toward his audiences. He knows that if he says, I used to victimize people like you in the audience, he knows that that's going to cause those people to distance themselves at that point in time, that it's going to cause them to look a little bit closer at him. All right, that they're going to feel foreign to him. He doesn't want that. He wants people to identify with him. So in order to do that, he minimizes his victims. He says, no, I never stole from people. Well, that's a friggin' lie, because he stole $1,200 from one woman. He stole $20,000 from another family. He victimized people across the board. Okay. And as well as trying to steal from banks and everything else. He had a host of victims. And here's what you got to remember, because we're talking about other fake criminals today as well. You have to remember that there really is no line in the sand. If profit is available, you're going to hit whoever you can get money from. And Frank Abagnale was no different. What happens with Frank, though, he gets out of prison. Now, whether the FBI sprung him or not, questionable. I'm going to tell you. So this is early 70s. It changes in the 80s, all right, the amount of time that you have to spend. Back in the 70s, you didn't have to spend a whole lot of time in prison. Even though he was sentenced to 12 years, he wouldn't have to serve anywhere near 12 years at that point in time. Now, if you're sentenced to, say, 10 or 12 years, you serve 87.7% of whatever that sentence is. Day for day is what that's called, even though it's not day for day. So you serve, 10 out of 12 days. All right. 10 and a half months out of 12 months is what served prison time. Back then, 20%, maybe less than that, is what you would have served. All right. So he wouldn't have served long on a 12-year sentence. Would the FBI have sprung him in order to get him to work? Very questionable. Now, it could have happened. It could have happened, but it's questionable, especially when you consider the other lies that were told. Now, he told a lie at one point that he escaped from Atlanta Federal Maximum Penitentiary. Probably not true. All right. Probably not true. He claims he was inspecting. He acted like he was inspecting fire extinguishers, talked the guard or talked the warden into letting his ass out through the visitation room. I have spoken to a U.S. Marshal, and the U.S. Marshals assure me that, hey, and Frank claims that what happened is they didn't give the proper paperwork over to penitentiary officials, and because of that, he was able to walk out. U.S. Marshals, this contact I have at U.S. Marshals assures me that no, that shit would not have happened. Now, let me tell you guys, because a lot of people are not familiar with the U.S. Marshals. The U.S. Marshals are the most on-point people, law enforcement-wise, that I have ever friggin' met. They are not only outstanding in the job that they do, but they are outstanding in the way that they treat people or inmates that they are taking in, transporting, what have you. They treat them as human beings. They treat them with respect. But by God, they do their job. And guess what? It's not just one, it's two. Two are there, and they make sure that they're doing everything right. So the chances of them not, that one agent, one marshal would not give the paperwork over. Okay, you might argue that, but there was two of them there at the point in time, and both of them are checks and balances for each other. So probably didn't happen again. Abagnale lying. Now, my thought on these lies. So I think that what happens is that Frank decides that he wants to start speaking, wants to turn things around. Okay. So how do you do that? Back then, there was no blueprint. See, today there's a blueprint out there. I look at Frank Abagnale and I say, well, he did this, and then I follow that. All right. And it works. It works. You got to build trust, but it works. So back then there wasn't. So Frank had to figure this bullshit out. So he starts speaking at high schools, at local business area meetings, stuff like that, commerce businesses, things like Chamber of Commerce places, stuff like that. And here's the thing. You want to get people's attention. Now, the way that I get people's attention, anyone who's ever seen me speak, the way that I get people's attention is I show my US Most Wanted picture. Then I talk about the prison escape, and I have this huge ass scream. All right. And that gets people's attention. All right. And I have a stage background, so I know how to do that. Frank doesn't have that. So he has to, how do you get people's attention if you've not been trained on stage about how to do that? You do it by making sure that you're telling something that gets people's attention. He wasn't confident enough about his story. I mean, his story, what are you going to say? Well, I cashed some checks. I got arrested. I spent some prison time. I did escape from prison. I mean, that's a good story. But what's better? I lied and I passed the bar exam. I cashed 17,000 checks. I stole $2.5 million. I took planes. I did all this stuff. And I acted as a doctor. Well, evidently he did act as a doctor on a campus in order to give women physical exams. Yeah, you want to talk about Me Too? Let's talk about the Me Too movement on that, because he admits to that shit. All right, so he was also stalked some people. That's stuff from the Catch Me If You Can movie where he's with all the girls walking at LAX. Well, that didn't really happen. What really happened is he showed up in a pilot's outfit at a party because he was stalking this one stewardess, and there were other stewardesses at the party, and they didn't like that shit at all. So there's small elements of truth that have been embellished and made, whitewashed across the years. But back then, I think that what happened is that Frank decides that he needs to tell more than what was. So he tells a lie. All right. Whatever crowd that was, they accept that lie. Well, guess what? People are going to come up to you after that. They're going to talk to you. They're going to want to know more. So he tells the initial lie on a stage, and then all of a sudden, or on a stage, or maybe to the Chamber of Commerce, he tells the lies in order to get on the stage. wherever the lie started, he then has to support that lie because people are going to start interacting. He's going to start talking about it. So you have to start building upon that lie. Bam, 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 bam. And then you have to start making things bigger. How do you get on a bigger stage? Well, you've told the initial lie. In order to get on a bigger stage, I'm going to have to tell an even bigger lie. I passed the bar exam. I was a pediatrician or whatever kind of freaking doctor he claims he was. So he has to continue telling the lies and supporting the lies over time. My own history. As I said, when I first started speaking, I hid some stuff. When you hide things, it is the same as a lie. All right. And I made the conscious decision that, oh, get it out there. Get it out there. I also, when I first started speaking, I referred to myself as a hacker. I am not a hacker. All right. First of all, hackers are not criminals. But more importantly, I talk about the three necessities of online crime: gathering data, committing crime, cashing out. The coding aspect, that computer intrusion stuff, I am a social engineer, and I'm a goddamn good one. All right. I mean, I am. I've got that shit's documented. All right. Manipulated the Secret Service, not proud of it, but I am an extremely effective social engineer. All right. So I referred to myself as a hacker for several months. No, I'm not. That was a lie. All right. That is the only lie that I told. I've said over the years. Now, here's what happens. As a speaker, as a former criminal, as one of these personalities, Frank Abagnale, Brett Johnson, some of these other guys that are on that claim stuff. As that happens, you will have people that will try to fill the holes for you. All right. Like Kevin Polson puts me in the book Kingpin, and he writes some stuff in there. I never gave an interview for that book. So he has to fill in the holes, and writers tend to fill the holes in with flamboyant shit. So what happens with me? I say I'm United States Most Wanted. I am a United States Most Wanted criminal. I absolutely am. Secret Service. A lot of the times, even though I've said I was on the United States Secret Service Most Wanted list, a lot of the times that's taken as FBI. Completely different US Most Wanted list. Completely different. All right. I was the first cyber criminal, and I'd have to check that. But as far as I know, I'm the first cyber criminal that was on a US Most Wanted list. Okay. There's a difference between the media that get things wrong or embellish, and that's going to happen, compared to the individual who starts lying and embellishing these stories. And that's what happens with Frank Abagnale. You expect the media to do that. You expect your followers to do that, the people in attendance to do that. It's very normal to do that. As kids, we do that stuff, right? We see a movie and we start embellishing the movie or making up stories to fill the holes in and stuff like that. Adults are really no different. You see something that's engaged, and sometimes you start to fill those holes. You make things bigger than they are because you want to impress people with what you've just seen. Media is very good about that. The press is very good about that. People in attendance sometimes are good about that too. That's normal. It's normal. What is not normal is when the person is on stage and tells those lies. They embellish their history themselves. All right. That's the difference. And that's exactly what Frank Abagnale does. Now, I don't know what to think about this. I don't, because Frank Abagnale absolutely inspired me to the career that I have today. He absolutely did. Without Frank Abagnale, I would not have even thought about doing this. I wouldn't have. I wouldn't have thought about doing this shit right here. But it's because of the Catch Me If You Can story that I do this. So I have even though the man has obviously lied about a whole shit ton of stuff, I still respect Frank Abagnale. Here's another point too as well. Frank Abagnale, over the decades that he has been doing this, has done some good. All right, there are going to be people who listen to this show who have read the book, who see the articles and everything like that, and they're going to say, and I've spoken to some of them, they're going to say, hey, he worked for us. Dude knew what he was talking about. He did some good. He absolutely helped us. I don't deny that. All right. I don't deny that. And here's what I'm getting at. Frank Abagnale was absolutely a criminal. He wrote some checks. He knew how to write bad checks. So he has that experience. He did not have the experience that he claims, though. And today that's also evident. For example, he worked at one point for AARP. AARP no longer associates with Mr. Frank Abagnale because the dude didn't know what he was talking about. He was giving bad advice. He was not what he was claimed to be. So they stopped associating with him. At that point, I come in and I kind of pick up the reins, and I was an ambassador for 2 or 3 years, maybe 3 or 4 years. I don't know. But I was an ambassador for a while. I think I'm still on their website listed as a fraud expert. All right. He was an embarrassment to them, and they cut his ass off. All right. Frank Abagnale's knowledge base, what you have to realize is, and I think a lot of people don't understand this that are on the good guy side, Frank Abagnale committed some minor to mid-level crimes. All right. He then turns his life around and starts to work as a security consultant for a few decades. A security consultant for a few decades. Now, here's what's important to bear in mind. His knowledge base does not stop at that mid-level crime that he committed. He becomes a security consultant. So he continues to gather knowledge throughout his career as a security consultant. So he does have a knowledge base. Make no mistake about that. So all these individuals and companies that say, hey, hey, he worked for us, he did some good. Granted, I absolutely agree with you. He has some knowledge, all right? But the knowledge does not come from a history of being a skilled criminal. It comes from a history of being a security consultant. So you're getting your knowledge from that side of the fence. And that's important to realize, all right? Because if you don't have if you're claiming to be a criminal and having a knowledge base of criminal networks and criminal behavior and the criminal mindset and all that stuff that comes with that, that's initially why these companies are hiring you. When I get hired, it's not because I've been a security consultant on the good guy side for 6 or 7 years. No, it's not. It's because I have an in-depth understanding of criminal networks, behaviors, the mindset, the psychology, what they're doing, the trends, where everything's going. When I talk to law enforcement agencies and they come to me with a list of huge-ass questions from other field offices, it's not because I'm a security consultant on the good guy side of the fence. It's because of that criminal history that I have and the understanding of what's going on. Frank Abagnale doesn't have that. He's got it from the good guy side. So it's really no different. It's no different than hiring somebody that has been a security consultant and never broken the law before, because he really doesn't understand a lot of the way that crime acts and is committed and things like that. The reason he's complaining about stuff, people are talking about this crime and that crime, that crime. They're even talking about cybercrime. The dude doesn't know cybercrime. There was no cybercrime out when he was committing it. Then he goes on the good guy security side. What he knows about cybercrime is the shit that the good guys talk about all the time. He doesn't know Tor. He doesn't know Telegram, why Telegram is important, the trust problems on Telegram. He doesn't understand that stuff. He doesn't understand trends and stuff like that. There was a company a few years ago that hires Frank Abagnale. It was my second year, and they hire Frank Abagnale to come in and keynote and talk about tax return identity theft. What? Dude doesn't know shit about that. Shit, I'm the son of a bitch that created it. So, but they're hiring him not because he's been on the good guy side, but because of the Catch Me If You Can story that he created claiming to commit all these crimes, all right? So just to understand, I'm not saying that Frank Abagnale has not done some good. He did my life some good. As a security consultant, he's got some knowledge. Now, he's 74. And I come here not to bury or not to praise Frank Abagnale, but to bury him. I'm not here to bury the guy. I'm not. He's 74. He's going to be buried in a few years anyway. His name has been made. My show is not going to affect that. A lot of these articles are not going to affect that. I looked him up. They estimate his net worth right now is like $10 million. you're not going to hurt his purse strings. You're not going to really probably hurt a lot of his speaking engagements. There's going to be some people that will not bring him in to speak now. Absolutely. All right. If you've got an organization that used to bring Frank Abagnale in for ethics training, probably you don't want to do that shit anymore. So he's going to lose some speaking engagements without a doubt, but it's not going to hurt his purse strings. It's not. And I don't want to detract from the amount of good he's done. I'm just saying that his base is not that criminal stuff. It's not. It's based on his knowledge acquired on the good guy side of the fence over the years, his work with the FBI. You know, he's like me. He talks at Quantico. All right. He claims he teaches classes. You don't teach classes. You talk at the CISO Academy. You give a presentation. All right. Same shit I do. You give a presentation. All right. So that's what happens. Okay. Now, the reason I say that is that I work in the cybersecurity and fraud industry. Okay. There is a necessity to understand what criminals are doing and how they're doing that. And you see a line floated across all the time of it's important to think like a criminal. So if you're, and here's what I say, unless you're a criminal, you're not going to think like a criminal. You know who thinks like criminals? Criminals. You know who's second in line? Law enforcement, because they get to associate with criminals more than anybody else. So you got your number ones, you got your criminals. You got behind that, you got law enforcement. Then you go into security people and stuff like that at the end of the day. And the farther away you get from that, the less you understand about how criminals actually think and operate and what they do. All right. So if you're a security analyst or a fraud analyst, let me tell you, you're not going to think like a criminal. Because you're not. If you attempt to do that, you're going to come up with some bullshit product like RFID blockers, you know, the RFID blocking wallets and stuff like that. That's what you're going to come up with. Or you're going to come up with bullshit like coming up with credit card numbers by algorithms. You're going to come up with shit like that because you got no criminal experience, or your criminal experience is so little that you really don't understand the stuff that's going on. So, and we're talking about Frank Abagnale today. So I wanted to be fair and just share that, you know, I don't want to take away from him because he certainly influenced my life. He's certainly done some good at the end of the day. Now, the past few years, Frank Abagnale, and especially, you know, I noticed it when he was working with AARP, he would talk about stuff and it was apparent that he really didn't understand the things that he was talking about. Somebody had given him notes. Now, I have worked in corporate for a while, all right, with several different companies. And let me tell you, what tends to go on is that whoever's going to be in front of a camera, the PR department or somebody shoots over an email or gives you a piece of paper with the talking points. This is what you need to mention. This happens here, this happens here, this happens here. And these are the questions that the interviewer is going to ask you. So you're prepared. So you look like you know what the shit you're talking about. That's the way this stuff works. All right. Frank Abagnale is really no different. Somebody hands him, he gives him talking points, tells him what to talk about. You know, this is how tax return identity theft works. You need to hit this point, you need to hit this point, and write your speech up and everything else. And this is what you say, and you stick to the script. That's what happens. The reason he doesn't accept questions after presentations like that is because you've got people in the audience who have been hit or are dealing with those types of fraud, or they've been victimized by fraudsters that are doing that stuff, and they have an experience. And they're going to ask a very specific question, and the chances of them getting off of the script that you've went by on stage, those chances are pretty friggin' good. So Frank typically does not take questions. When he does take questions, and he did a couple of times while working with AARP, he gave advice and answers that were simply wrong. He would say something and then he wouldn't back its ass up at all because there was no backing up. He would repeat a talking point. When they would ask for an explanation, he wouldn't be able to give it because he didn't understand what the hell was going on. So we're talking today about fake criminals, and it's not just Frank Abagnale. As I was talking about this stuff, somebody sent me over a story of, this is from the New York Times. Terrorism detailed in New York Times podcast. In exchange for the admission of the man Shehroz Chaudhry, Canada dropped criminal charges against him. So this dude claimed that he was an Islamic State fighter. He was part of ISIS. He claimed he was part of ISIS and was fighting for ISIS. And what he did is he started to use photographs, some well-known photographs, to say, this is me fighting. This is me doing this stuff. He claimed to be an ISIS member. And what happens is Canada believes his bullshit, and they go and pick him up and they charge him. At which point he finally admits, that's the weird thing, finally admits, oh, I was lying the entire time. And when he admits it, they drop the charges. There's a whole history of people who lie for that type of status. Okay, they're for whatever. Maybe they're screwed up in the head. Maybe they're just trying to gain respect. They've got low self-esteem, whatever. We've seen people that have claimed to be serial killers. Seen people that have claimed to be notorious rapists, fraudsters, have claimed all kinds of stuff. This idea of lying becomes very important when we're looking at people like Frank Abagnale, people like myself. I want to talk for a second about cyber criminals and that crime network that I helped establish with Shadow Group. So people who've heard me speak know that before 3 sites come into play, Counterfeit Library, Shadow Crew, finally Carter Planet, the only real avenue you had to commit cybercrime was IRC, Internet Relay Chat, this rolling chat board where you didn't really know who the hell you were talking to. If they had a product or service, you didn't know if they had it, if it worked, if they were just going to rip you off, because people in those channels, they were all criminals. So you had no trust that was going on. And the problem is that those 3 necessities, gathering data, committing crime, cashing out, a single cyber criminal can't do all 3. So he has to rely on other people to fill the holes that he's lacking. To do that, you have to trust those people. So my main claim, and I've got a lot of firsts, all right, but what I consider my main claim of notoriety in cybercrime is establishing what I call the trust mechanism with online crime. You have to be able to trust those criminal associates when you don't know each other, don't know what each other look like, and you're not going to meet each other. So what we did is I built this thing of this review system initially. So any seller that came on, they would have to supply enough products so that we were convinced that they could supply those products. They would have to have people vouching for them. So we had vouching systems in place. We had review systems in place. The way the dark web, and it's a little bit different on Telegram, the way the dark web works is you have a brand name. Your screen name becomes your brand, all right? And that screen name translates to every single marketplace and forum on the dark web. You know by looking at someone's screen name what the skill level of that individual is, what the history of that individual is, all right? You know that. You know if you can trust that person, if you can learn from that person, if you can network with that person. The review systems, the escrow systems, the vouching systems, all that are there to establish trust with one criminal and another. When I vouch for someone in those criminal networks, when you vouch, what that means is I accept responsibility for this person that I'm saying is safe to buy from. I'm telling my entire network of people that, hey, I believe this person. I vouch for this person. If this person screws anyone over, don't go to them. You come to me and I will make it right and I will make them answer. And that's what I did. Okay? That's the way that trust works because you're dealing with criminals. Okay? What we see on the good guy side is we see a need, and there is absolutely a need to talk to or have that criminal perspective on things because criminals have a lot of information. They absolutely do. The problem is that how do you trust a criminal? I would say first and foremost that what's more important is you don't have to trust that person that's a former criminal, but you have to be assured that they know what the hell they're talking about. So how do you do that? Fortunately, if I'm former US Most Wanted, that is a degree of legitimacy. Believe you not, because you ain't put on that list unless you've done something that gets somebody's attention, really the entire United States government's attention. So you've got a skill level out the gate to be U.S. Most Wanted. All right. Not only that, but for me, I've had law enforcement come up. There was forgot the channel. It was Colonel Panic. Colonel Panic does a show where they bring FBI people on to lend into my story. Okay. So I've got that. I've got people in the fraud industry, in the cybersecurity industry, who were aware of who the hell I was before I tried to turn my life around. I've got the Shadow Crew files, the databases are out there, so you can look at what Brett Johnson, aka Gollum Fun, used to do. The internet was around, so the history is there. All right. Frank Abagnale doesn't have that. He claims a lot of shit, but the internet wasn't around there, so it's hard to start putting all these pieces together, especially when you're looking back to the 1970s or 60s when he claims this shit was going on and those records ain't there no more. All right, so it's hard to do that. These days, it's much easier to verify what's going on. The problem that we're dealing with right now, especially in cybersecurity, in the fraud industry, is sometimes, what does a vouch mean? A vouch means that someone who is respected, someone who is skilled, someone who knows their shit is saying, hey, this person right here, he can be trusted. He knows his shit. He's scared, or sometimes she. The problem is that sometimes you get someone vouching for someone that shouldn't be vouching. They don't have the skill level. They don't have the expertise. They don't have the history. They're using their expertise in another field to vouch for someone in a criminal field, and it doesn't translate at all. All right. Now, the reason I say that is in cybersecurity, we have, and in fraud in general, we have a host of people that have criminal histories. All right. A host. And if I were vouching for people, there are people that I would vouch for. For example, there is Matt Cox. Matt Cox is a United States Most Wanted Cybercriminal. He's out of prison. He's turned his life around. He's got the Matt Cox Show. He's the most prolific mortgage fraudster in history. This guy ate them alive. All right. He committed synthetic fraud, identity theft. He knows his shit. All right. He's now just starting to work his way over into cybersecurity and talking about, the social engineering aspects of things, stuff like that. I would vouch for him in a heartbeat, because now the vouch for him, that vouch means that, hey, he knows his shit. He's a verified criminal. He knows the mindset. He understands how these things are done. Not only that, but he is turning his life around, because that comes with the vouch as well. So now that I have vouched for Matt Cox, what that means is that if he gets on stage and he utters some bullshit that he doesn't know, and you got audience members in attendance, like used to be with Frank Abagnale, and they sit there and they're hearing that, they're like, this sumbitch doesn't understand a thing he's talking about. Who does that fall back on? It should fall back on me to a degree, because I've said, hey, I believe this guy. I think he's outstanding. All right. So I vouched for Matt, and I do vouch for Matt. All right. Now, I got to tell you, Matt can be a bit abrasive every now and then, but he knows his shit. He absolutely does. All right. Matt's not the only one that I would vouch for. I would vouch for Cal Leeming. Cal's over in the UK. He knows his shit. I would vouch for John Giannone. I would vouch for Albert Gonzalez. I would vouch for these people because they are verifiable. They know what they're talking about. They're able to actually voice what they're talking about in an understandable way. See, it's more than just being a criminal. You have to be able to put that into words that translate to value for the people who you're consulting with. And those people that I've talked about, they absolutely can do that. They absolutely can do that. Now, the reason I'm doing this show, Days Fake Criminals, the reason I'm doing this show, I was in Saudi Arabia a few months ago in Riyadh. And country's outstanding. The people are absolutely extraordinary. They truly are. I was invited there with another criminal, former criminal, Tony Sales. And I gave my presentation. Tony gets up and gives his presentation. And because of that, I had, for the past few months, I have been really struggling mentally and emotionally and morally with what happened during that presentation. All right, because I've got to say out of the gate, I cannot vouch for Mr. Sales. That doesn't mean he's not a criminal. All right, but I can't vouch for him. I would not do that because I had a discussion with him at one point, and he tells me he does a very little amount of time in prison. I give my presentation, and then he gets up on stage and he says that he did several years. So he was telling lies on prison, and he bragged constantly. And there was a lot of what I view as cognitive dissonance on stage. And not only that, but the crimes that he was talking about, he didn't go in depth with them enough to indicate any real understanding of those crimes. Instead, what he did is he showed that he still, to me, had the same type of mindset that he had when he was shoplifting, which was what his crime was. All right. And I've spoken to some law enforcement officers in the UK, and they have had issues verifying some of the stories that have been told. All right. So I'm not trying to detract from him. I know that people have hired him. I know that he works. I know that he does some good. Okay. But I would not vouch for him the way that I would a Matt Cox or an Albert Gonzalez or a John Giannone or a Cal Lehman. I would not do that because I don't trust what I have personally seen and heard from sources. I would not do that. Stateside, there are other people here that I would not vouch for. I would not vouch for Alexander Hall, for example. Would not. That's not to say that Alexander doesn't do some good, but I would not vouch for him because I have spoken to him, and at one point he told me that he was associated with the Mexican cartels in his former life. At another point, he says he was not. I happen to know people that are in the cartels. From my past history, I do know people that are in the cartels, and I know how they operate. And I find that difficult to believe, especially when the stories have varied. And not only that, but some of his postings previously concerning criminal activity were simply not the way that criminals would operate online. Now, so there are people that I would not vouch for. All right. But I understand what I'm saying there. I'm not saying that they don't deliver value. They deliver value in much the same way that Frank Abagnale does. They are working as security consultants. Yeah, I have no doubt that they committed crime in their past. I have no doubt of that whatsoever. But I do think that their stories have been embellished because, much like Frank, trying to get gigs, trying to get in front of an audience, trying to get hired. So unless you've got a tag like US Most Wanted or somebody that, hey, knows their shit that's vouching for you out of the gate, you've got to get that acceptance. You've got to get that attention. Much like Frank, you start saying shit, and some of it starts to hit, and then you got to support that by saying more shit. So you build that house of cards up all of a sudden. I'm not saying that they're not criminals. They are. They do have some criminal history. I have no doubt about that. I am saying that the knowledge base of good that they're doing right now doesn't come from an experience of criminal history. It comes from an experience of being a security consultant. There's a difference. If you're wanting to hire a criminal, if you're wanting to understand criminal activity, first, you look for a criminal. The problem with that, it's hard to trust a criminal because we lie a lot. Unless you really have turned your life around, how do you know that you can trust that person? The people that I said I vouch for, Cal, John, Matt, Albert, I don't think they would lie to you. I don't. And if they do, that would fall back on me because I've just vouched for them. These other people, I think that they've embellished their history, that they claim a bunch of shit that's simply not true, that they do some good, but the good is based on the knowledge that they've acquired by being legal, law-abiding security consultants, not based on understanding the criminal mindset and criminal activity of their pasts. All right. I just wanted to get that out there. We live in an industry where truth matters. All right. I have people that reach out to me, whether it be media, whether it be security consultants, whether it be merchants and retailers, things like that. I have people that reach out to me, companies that reach out to me that have problems. They are being hit and they need to know what the hell's going on. All right, how is it happening? What's going on? They're looking for a criminal, someone who understands those criminal environments, to do that. Now, I am very good. I have an extensive history in the past of being a criminal from the age of 10 on up. Okay, I'm very good about doing that. Understand that when I talk about these other individuals that I'm not vouching for, and there's more than just them, there's a whole host of people out there. And just because I vouch for some people today doesn't mean I wouldn't vouch for others. I just may not know them well enough yet. But there are a whole host of people that I would not that I would never say, yeah, listen to these people. Okay, even though they may be doing some good. I'm not much. I'm different to a degree in that I have the criminal history, but I work as a security consultant as well. So my knowledge base continues to extend today, much like these other guys, because we're doing security work working with these companies. You know, when I deal with a client, speak at a conference, give an interview, I'm learning. They're just not learning from me. I'm learning from them as well. I'm like a sponge. I take it all in. All right. And people who have known me over the years, from when I first started in 2016 to today, they can look at you and say, man, this son of a bitch has learned a whole lot from that first couple of times he was on stage. And I have, I've got the vernacular down. I understand a lot of the systems, things like that. When I started with Arcos as chief criminal officer, shit, I've never used a bot network. I had to Google that shit. I had to have the engineers sit down with me and give me training and everything else. So my knowledge base on how bot networks work comes from the good guy side. It doesn't come from the bad guy side. What I do, though, is I apply my history, my experience as a criminal, to understanding that knowledge base that I'm gaining on the good guy side. And it tends to work pretty well. It does. It tends to work pretty well. That expertise, that skill level that I've got affords me an insight into my work, my legal work now, that most people don't have. And that's what I'm saying about these other guys. Matt Cox, for example, he's just getting started in the security field. He's been talking. He's got his own show. He's an outstanding guy. He's just getting started. As he talks more and more and works more and more with clients, he's going to be like a sponge too and start getting this stuff up. John Giannone, he's done outstanding work. If I could talk about some of the stuff he's done, you'd understand. But he's great. All right. Albert Gonzalez is going to get his ass out of prison. It's going to take him a while to get off probation and turn his life around. I mean, he's already turned his life around, but he's going to be good if he decides to go into that type of consulting work. If he decides to, if not, that's on, he can do that shit too. Cal Leeming does a lot of good right now, because you're coming from that criminal background. You're working as a security consultant. It gives you an insight and a skill level and a knowledge and experience and just an overall ability to view things in a way that no one else is able to do unless you're coming from that type of background. So I just wanted to share that. I had a light fell on me just then. So we went a little dark. We went a little dark right there. Just wanted to get that out. All right. As I said, truth is important these days. All right. It's always important, but especially in cybersecurity. If you're victim or you're being hit with an attack, if you're looking for the criminal view of that, you want to be sure that you're getting the criminal view of that. We've got people in this industry that are claiming things that aren't true. Frank Abagnale does that. Frank Abagnale he gives cybersecurity presentations without understanding cybercrime or cybersecurity. All right. He does that. Now he's bitching to this reporter in this story. I don't know why they're writing cybercrime stories about me. Well, dude, you're asking for that shit. So that's what you get. And let's not say that you don't like it. You love it when it increases your speaking fee. All right. These other guys that are embellishing tales as well. I'm not saying they're not doing some good, because they are. But it's important to understand that their knowledge bases are not what people think they are. Okay? So take that with a grain of salt, some of these things that you hear. I talk every time I'm online or in a podcast on stage, I talk about the necessity of verification. All right? Trust but verify. Who is vouching for these people? All right? What gives them the ability to vouch for these people? If someone says, hey, yeah, we're putting this guy up on stage, he's a former fraudster, and he's going to be keynoting our presentation, our conference up in New York or Los Angeles or Las Vegas or where have you. Just because it's written doesn't make it so. Who initially vouched for that person? See who that is. What's their skill level? Are they skilled? Yeah, they're probably skilled in something, but are they skilled in the area that they're vouching for that individual? No, by God, they're not. Okay? I am all for hiring criminals, former criminals. Trust has to be established. All right. You have to know what the skill level, what the expertise of that person is. How do you know that? You know by who's vouching for them. You know by their documented history. If someone's claiming to be a fraudster and they've never been arrested and they're saying they're the king of this city and they've never been arrested, you need to be questioning that shit immediately. All right. If they don't have that history, if it's just one newspaper report that says you're the number one fraudster in your country, you need to be questioning that. You need to be aware. Where's the history? Where's the documented history? Where's the law enforcement people that's coming up saying, yeah, this son of a bitch did this? All right. Where is that? Where's all the reports across all this, the police documents, everything else? Where is that? If you don't have that, you need to be suspect out of the gate about bringing these people in. And if you do bring them in, understanding where their knowledge base is coming from. Taking it with a grain of salt that, hey, they know what they're talking about with crime, but they may know what they're talking about from a security consultant point of view. All right. So just be aware of that. I guess, you know, my thing is that I made reference to that just a few minutes ago. If you're wanting criminal insight, the first place you should go is talking to a criminal. And I've given, you know, other than myself, I've given other people that are out there, and there are other people than that too. But you need to verify who they are. All right. So you first go to a criminal. Barring that, the next closest that you're going to get is law enforcement and former law enforcement, because they have dealt with individuals like I used to be their entire career. And as you deal with these people, self included, you're going to get an understanding of that mindset. You're going to adopt traits of that. You're going to have an insight that regular security people or fraud analysts don't have. So you start with a criminal, you go to law enforcement, then former law enforcement. Then where do you go to from there? You go to your security analyst, your fraud analyst, and then finally you get down to common Joe on the street. All right. And that's those separations of degree, knowledge, and experience and insight. All right. If you can find the criminal that's able to actually put into words these concepts, crimes, mindsets, psychologies of criminals that gives value to the people who are asking the questions, that's exactly what you want to do. And yes, I am blowing my own horn there. All right. But that's really where you want to go. And these other people that I've mentioned today, they can do that exact same shit. I have no doubt. Here's the thing. Anybody that doubts the people that I have vouched for today, self included, anybody who does that, we will take the Pepsi fucking challenge with you. All right. You put any of those guys in a room and start asking questions. How do you know that someone is skilled? They're skilled because, hey, we don't have to have questions in advance. We don't. You just ask out of the gate. Hey, guess what? If we don't know something, we ain't going to make bullshit up. We're going to say, hey, I don't know that. I'm not skilled in that, because we're confident in our experience. Not only that, but guess what? We'll start to riff on shit. You start asking us stuff, and we're just going to start brainstorming right out of the gate, and it's going to come real fluid, real easy, real quick. And we're going to blow your mind on stuff all of a sudden. All those guys I just talked about, that's what they can do. These other guys, not so much. Not so much. And that's how you're going to know about it. Yeah, they may regurgitate some stuff that they've heard from me or Matt or Albert or some of these other guys in the past. They may regurgitate some stuff, but you know what they're not going to do? They're not going to go in depth with it. They're going to keep it superficial, because they don't really understand what they're talking about. So they're going to keep it superficial, and they're going to try to bang over to something else. And they're going to try to brag. All right. They're going to talk about the money they stole, about how they ran things. They're going to talk about all that. They're not going to talk about the damage that they did, or the harm that they caused, or, the people that they ripped off. They're going to say, I hit banks, I hit governments. I didn't really steal from mom and pop, or, single moms. They're not going to admit that. It's about being open. It's about being honest. It's about knowing what you're talking about. And it's about that if you're listening to someone, knowing who gave them, who opened the door for them. Was it somebody who knew what they were talking about when they opened the door for that person that's claiming these things? My name is Brett Johnson. This show has actually ran a little bit longer than what I thought it would run. I got to say I'm bothered. Frank Abagnale is 74 years old. He has lived his life. You're not going to stop Frank. Stories that are coming out now, even if they, catch like wildfire, it's not really going to harm Frank Abagnale. And at the end of the day, it may actually hurt people that are in the industry, because again, Frank has done some good. He absolutely helped me turn my life around. That story is fundamental in me turning my life around. He's absolutely done some good in the industry as well. These days he doesn't. He simply doesn't really know what he's talking about anymore. He's 74. I'm 53. My out date, I have told my family and my wife, people who've listened, I don't want to be the guy that's still doing this at the point where I'm the Frank Abagnale today, where I no longer know what I'm talking about. My out date is when I turn 60. I've got I'm 53. January when I turn 60, I quit. That's 7 years. 7 years, 2030. You'll no longer see me doing this, and probably, hopefully, before that, I continue to try to evolve. I get these messages all the time about, like this last week, I got like 5 or 6 people this last week who reached out to me. They had watched the Lex Friedman podcast, or they had watched me on Darknet Diaries, heard me on Darknet Diaries, or watched my show, and they've reached out to me to tell me that they've gone through hardship, and that it means something, that they really found a lot of value by me being open and talking about being able to turn my life around and the hardships that I've went through. And ideally, what I want to do is I'll continue talking about cybercrime and security and fraud and all that. But what I want to do is I want to talk more about that kind of stuff. Talk about overcoming, the life of abuse and, your bad choices, bad actions, or victimizing people, and being able to turn things around. We live in a society right now where it seems that, we're judged about things we may have done decades ago, and people don't really want to accept that people can turn their lives around, that people can change. So I really want to take this show, the Brett Johnson Show, and be morphing more and more toward that. That's why I'm not really, I've talked about Frank, I've talked about a couple of these other guys. That's why I'm really not hammering these. I really want people to understand that, that lies may have been told, embellishments, things like that, but that doesn't mean they didn't bring value. All right. And nothing is ever, I lead a very black and white life these days, but in the truth, very rarely are things black and white. Things are just shades of gray. Not all criminals are the same. We are not. I mean, there's a movement. There's been people on LinkedIn, friends of mine, associates, peers, that's the word. There have been peers of mine on LinkedIn who they like to paint all criminals the same. And they even have these little, about every 3 months, you'll see somebody pop up and say, well, we need to stop calling them fraudsters. What's a better word for them? Criminals is fine, okay? But understand we're not all the same. Some of us can change. Some of us are motivated by different things. Some of us have cognitive dissonance and we feel boxed in and we don't really see any other choice sometimes than committing crime or stealing money. Some of us just want to steal money. Some of us would just want to watch the world burn. Everyone's different, and everyone should be viewed as different. That doesn't mean you don't need to go to prison if you commit a crime. I'm a firm believer that if you're an adult and you victimize someone, if you commit a crime against someone, prison will do you good. It will get you off the street. It will give you time to think. Maybe you'll pause and take the opportunity to turn your life around and accept responsibility for your actions. We don't need to view everyone as the same. And I talk about that. That's the last presentation I gave in Orlando. I really hit upon that. Just understand that. My name is Brett Johnson. This is the Brett Johnson Show. What do we say? We say stay safe, stay secure, and stay vigilant. More importantly, this is the Brett Johnson Show. At the end of the day, just do the right damn thing. I'm Brett Johnson. I want to thank you for taking the time of your day to listen. Until next week.